want to paint your florals in bright, fresh colors that still has realism but a glowing beauty to it, well, continue watching this video. I'm going to break this down for you guys, and we're going to go through step by step how to make beautiful floral watercolors. Today I have this reference photo for a lily. This is a tiger lily. It grows all over Pennsylvania. They're absolutely gorgeous, and I was inspired by this reference photo, so here we go. I have a very simple palette. The colors, most colors that I'm going to be using today is the Aussie Gold, Quinacridone Red, a little bit of Permanent Rose, and for the greens I do have Sap Green, Hooker's Green, and Shadow Green. For a more neutral yellow, I do also have some cadmium yellow light. But the first thing that we're going to do here is wet our petal really, really well. We're going to be working wet on wet. For the shadows, I do have a little bit of blue in my palette. Just a cobalt blue would be perfect. So that is the first thing I'm grabbing. When I look at watercolors, I try to think about it in layers. And so when you're looking at the subject, okay, so you're going to have light areas and you're going to have darker areas where the shadows are. Where the shadows are, instead of using black, because that is not a good color, it's not going to mix well with the other colors that we're going to put on top, you want to use some natural colors like blues and purples. And so that's why I grabbed the blue, and I am going to go from the blue to my yellow, and I'm using the more neutral yellow, the cadmium yellow light. Notice that in my palette, my colors are quite dry. I don't have a lot of water on my palette. I don't need that because you have water on the paper. And that's where a lot of people go wrong when they're doing wet on wet, is that there's just too much water everywhere. If we have water on the paper, we don't need a lot of water in the palette. And from there, I'm grabbing my red, and I'm going to let things mix mostly on the paper. I am just going about painting where I see all these lines and the darker colors of the petal. And because my paper's wet, it's going to soften and it's going to mix together, and it's going to look really pretty. My advice is just to practice, guys. Even before you do the real thing on the real piece of paper, take some scrap papers. When I'm done painting, when I'm practicing, I'll use the front side, I'll use the back side, and guess what? I just throw them in the garbage when I'm done. If you don't have a lot of paper in your garbage, then you're not practicing. And the more you practice, the better you get. So it's funny because when I first started watercolor about, I don't know, let's see, 6-7 years ago, and I look at the things that I painted then versus now, it's like amazing how much you can learn and how much better you get with your paint, with the intuition of what colors to use, with your paint strokes. And the more knowledge you get, the better you'll get at it. And it's just practice. Now, one thing I have to say is that you do have to use 100% cotton paper. I would spend the money on the paper every single time. If you have student grade water paper, you're not going to get good results. Yeah, it's cheap, but it's cheap for a reason, and you will not be able to do this type of technique with non-cotton paper. So I just keep looking at my reference photo, and I just keep adding in the lines and all these brush strokes where I need to. I'm working with, I have like a quill brush here that are super cheap that I got on Amazon, and they kind of replaced my silver brush series that I used to use, the round silver brush. I still use it, but not as much as these Ortega brushes. They're just amazing. I absolutely love them. Once your paper starts to dry, this is the perfect time to do some lifting. So I'm using a damp script liner brush, and where I want to lift up some color, I'm just going through. Now notice you can already see it happening. So what we're actually doing is actually making a controlled bloom. I like to call it a controlled bloom. Because your paper is wet, you're adding water, it's going to push the pigment out of the way and lighten that area. And that is a controlled bloom. It's not by accident. We're doing it very, very controlled and precise. Now, if your script liner brush is too wet, you will make a very large uncontrolled bloom and it will wreck the effect, and you'll have to re-wet that area and apply more pigment, and it'll just get to be a hot mess. So that in itself, folks, is a great thing to practice. Just what I would do is cover your paper with a solid wash, wait for it to start drying, and when you get at that perfect sweet spot of your paper drying, that's when you're going to practice lifting with a script liner brush, a damp script liner brush. All right, so I'm pretty happy with that, and look at how luminous those colors are and how realistic it looks. I am moving on to the next petal, and so you're just going to work around. Obviously, I'm not working on the petal right next to it because I would run into that petal that I just painted and bad things would happen. So you want to wait till your petal is completely dry before touching any other petal to it. So skip a petal, work on the next petal, and that's exactly what I'm doing. And I'm taking my time about wetting it, and I'm going to continue on doing my light colors and putting the light colors in first and continually starting to go darker. I do like this little bit of light puddle that's ran down my palette that kind of got mixed all on its own with some of my reds and yellows that are in my palette. So I'm picking that up kind of as an underpainting. And from there, I can use some more concentrated yellows and reds. I always pretty much start off with the more neutral cadmium yellow, and then I pick up the darker orangey yellow, which is my Aussie yellow. And just to remind you guys, the reds that I have in my palette, I do have quinacridone red and a little bit of permanent rose. So I'm pulling the color I already have. Notice what I'm doing? I'm pulling that color and I'm creating these lines, these textures that I see on the tiger lily. Bringing in some of that blue where I do see some shadows in the very center of the flower. And each petal that I paint, I'm working it the exact same way. When you want a little bit more of a punch of color, you're going to make sure that you have your paintbrush to be fairly dry, just damp, not really saturated wet. And when you pick up the pigment, it will be a lot more bright on your paper. And again, guys, that just takes practice. That just takes playing around with your watercolors. But I'm explaining it to you in detail to try to help save you that learning curve because a lot of people won't really explain that very much in tutorials, whereas I like to really tell you in detail what I'm doing and why it's working. But I can't stress enough that the most important thing in your watercolor arsenal is going to be your paper. I love to use the Nicole Collection series. I also use Arches and always cold press. I do not like hot press. It's too smooth and your paper dries too fast. And it's not very forgiving, hot press. So if you make a mistake, it's quite noticeable. So notice I'm trying to get those little textures, those little, almost like a wrinkly appearance to the ruffled edges of this lily petal. Here I come doing those controlled blooms with a damp brush. My damp script liner brush, I'm lifting. So you run that through, wipe it off on a piece of paper towel in order to get those lines. So that's looking pretty good. I'm going to switch over. I skip a petal. I'm going to work on the next petal. Now, I'm not going to retell you the exact same thing for each petal because that would be awfully boring. I'm going to let you enjoy a little music here and just watch the process. I will speed this up a little bit so that we get to a new part of the flower where I can tell you something new. Okay, So now we have all the petals done. I'm going to work on the center of the flower. I'm going to start off by putting my cadmium yellow light over that whole stamen. I'm also bringing in some of that blue because there are some shadows there. And while I wait for that layer to dry, if you want to lift any more details on your flower, now is a good time to do it because all the petals are dry. You could use a damp, flat brush if you want to have more of an effect of these lighter areas. And so that is what I'm doing here, folks. Okay, so a stiff, damp, flat brush will do the job. Now that the center is dry, I'm going to go back in with the darker yellow that I have, which is my Aussie Yellow Gold, and continue working on the middle here. To add the pollen on the very tips here, I am dipping my brush into a little bit of the sepia. So those are the final little touches to the middle of the flower. And now we could work on the stems. So I'm going to do the stems in the exact same way by wetting them first. And I'm grabbing my sap green. I also have some Daniel Smith green in there. I think it's the sea green. I can't remember the exact name, but I will have the, I'll look at my tube and I will put that in the description of the video, all the colors that I used. So to give that a more three-dimensional look, I am darkening up one side there, as you can see. And when you drop it in, when it's nice and wet like that, it'll have a nice gradient effect. Now there's a few buds in the reference photo. I'm going to add those in. And of course, I'm going to use the exact same colors and painting those buds the exact same way. Now, in order to kind of make that look like it's in the background, I did add some blue because there's going to be a shadow from the front petal. So it pushes it back a little bit. So that's looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to go ahead and wet the last bud and stem area. Notice I do take my time. Obviously, I have sped the video up too, so otherwise this would be a really long video. But I do take my time when I pre-wet that area. You want to make sure that the water really soaks into the fibers of the paper before you start laying down your color. Okay, so working that same technique there with adding the blue for the background, and I'm putting the blue over the red, and it's making this gorgeous purple all on its own by mixing on the paper. And it looks so much more natural. If I was to do that in the palette, probably wouldn't turn out as pretty. You know, I have to be mindful that the bottom part is drying, so I'm working on the bottom part now, adding color to that. Getting my greens in there. Same process as when I did the stem. And going ahead and adding in the darker green. I like to mix my greens with sepia. It makes a really nice shadow color. So that is looking pretty good. I decided to put a glaze just in the middle. I felt like part of the petals needed to be a little warmer. And so if you want a little bit more vibrancy, that's a trick for you. You don't have to put it everywhere, but in the areas where you want to warm things up, you pre-wet that area and then put a glaze of your yellow on top. Just adds a little bit more of a punch of color. And that is it. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Post a picture of it in the community section so I can see. And would love to chat with you. See you next time.